In this video, we're going to talk a little bit about things you should consider if you're buying a New York City apartment from out of state. I'm Nick at Houseit. We can save you money if you are buying in New York City through a buyer agent commission rebate. You can learn more by visiting our website, houseit.com, or if you want to speak with me directly, give us a call or send me a text. The number is below on the screen, 888-494-8258. So let's go ahead and get started. So here are a few things to think about if you are coming from out of state and looking to purchase an apartment in New York City. The first thing to keep in mind is the fact that co-ops have relatively strict financial requirements that are imposed by the buildings themselves. These buildings are stricter with their requirements than what lenders will underwrite you to. And what I mean by that is the fact that, for example, a lender will allow about 43% of your monthly income to go towards your housing expense, whereas a co-op might only allow 25%. Now, this can come as quite a shock if you're coming from out of state, especially if you're coming from, a single family house where there are no building requirements. So just to provide an example, if you're looking to buy like a $2 million apartment here in New York City and it's a co-op, let's say the monthly payment is around $14,000. If you make $350,000, you can probably afford this $2 million apartment. But if this is a co-op and they're requiring a 25% debt to income ratio, your income needs to be way more than that. In fact, it probably has to be closer to $700,000 in order to meet the requirement imposed by the building. So just keep that in mind. You have the debt to income ratio requirement for co-ops, and also you have much higher requirement for down payment. So for example, your typical co-op in New York City will require at least 20%, and certain parts of town, for example, if you're on like the west side, older co-ops, more prestigious co-ops may require 25, sometimes 35 or even 50% down. So just to go back to the $2 million apartment example, if you think you can afford a $2 million apartment, you can buy a condo and put down perhaps 10%, that's $200,000. But if you want to buy a co-op that's $2 million, you might have to put down $400,000, possibly even $500,000. So that is several $100,000 more in savings that you need to have. Moreover, co-ops also have a post-closing liquidity or cash requirement, which is more onerous than what a lender will require. So your typical lender will require that you have, say, 6 months of your mortgage and maintenance payment in a liquid asset at closing. Co-op will require something more like 2 years worth. So when you add all of this up, just keep in mind that with a co-op, you need to have significantly greater assets. However, you can figure out solutions such as perhaps receiving a gift from a family member. So there are ways to work around these financial requirements. It also varies by building. So we're always happy to help and give you our thoughts on any specific listing that you may be considering. And of course, we can also offer you a commission rebate and help reduce your buyer closing costs. You can learn more by visiting our website. The link is below in the description. Another thing to keep in mind if you're coming from out of state and looking to buy a New York City apartment is the fact that the actual offer, if it's accepted, is not legally binding until about a week or two after you receive notice of acceptance. And that's because when we submit offers in New York City, they're not submitted in the form of a contract, as is the case in other parts of, quite frankly, New York, but other states. For example, in like South Florida, when we submit an offer for you, we would fill out a contract and then the seller would basically decide whether or not to countersign it. If they countersign it, you're locked in. They can't just shop your offer or anything like that. But in New York City, that's not the case. So when you have that accepted offer, it simply means that you have a framework in place for a deal, but until that contract is signed a week or two down the line, nothing is set in stone. So this means it's very important when you think about who to hire for your real estate attorney, that they're not on vacation, that they're not working remotely. Despite their best intentions, working remotely never results in a quick contract turnaround. And so any incremental delay on the part of your lawyer can put you at risk of potentially being outbid and losing the apartment. So this is particularly important to keep in mind if you're solving for like a start date at a new job, or if you have a certain very firm deadline that you need to meet to be here in the city, to move to New York City. This is absolutely something you need to keep in mind. And as a result of the risk of being outbid after you have an accepted offer, it is common for buyers in New York City to submit multiple offers. Another thing to keep in mind if you're coming from out of state and buying a New York City apartment is that buyer closing costs in New York City can be rather high, and most likely they are higher than what you're accustomed to from the state you're coming from. So we have a buyer closing cost calculator on our website, but just to summarize, if you're buying a condo, closing costs can be around, say, 4.5%. If you're buying a co-op, they're going to be lower, maybe closer to 2%. However, it does depend on the price point, and there's also other ramifications when it comes time to sell. Closing costs flip in the sense that co-ops sometimes have higher seller closing costs, and condos will have lower seller closing costs. So take a look at our closing cost calculator, and remember, you can save a significant amount of money on your buyer closing costs through a commission rebate. We offer them here at House It. It's very simple how it works. We would be your buyer's agent throughout the process. Traditional buyer's agent, we'd go with you to showings, we'd run comps, we'd help you negotiate, we'd help you with the board package. The difference is at closing, when we get paid a buyer agent commission from the seller, we will give you back a large portion of it. So rebates are completely legal here in New York and dozens of other states. We also offer them in parts of New Jersey, adjacent to New York City, and South Florida, along with Long Island and the Hudson Valley. Another thing to keep in mind if you are coming to New York City from out of state and buying a New York City apartment is the fact that there is some uncertainty with respect to co-ops. And what we mean is the fact that because a co-op building is allowed to basically review your application and reject you, it means that even if you have a signed contract for a co-op, there is a possibility that the co-op could just turn you down, at which point there's nothing you can do and you essentially have to restart your search. So this does create a remote risk if you're solving for a specific move-in date, that all of a sudden the home you thought you were about to buy is no longer in the picture. So just keep that in mind if you're looking for absolute certainty. Well, nothing is certain in life, but if you're looking for the odds to be significantly increased, that your plan will go to plan, then you should really focus on condos. Now, obviously, condos in New York City are much more expensive, but there are other things to keep in mind as well, condo versus co-op. But we have a long video on this. The link is above, and you can also check out our article on this. The link is below in the description. Another thing to keep in mind if you're coming from out of state and buying a New York City apartment is that not all lenders are proficient with co-ops, which is the most common property type here in New York City. So if you use your lender from out of state, chances are they may come to you and say, look, we're not comfortable with this collateral, we can't do the deal. So just make sure that like when you come to New York City, you're aware of these constraints. You're hopefully speaking with several lenders who have closed obviously co-ops in New York City. Now, that's not to say it's hard to find a lender that does co-ops. Basically, all the big ones know how to do it at this point. But just keep in mind that your small credit union from the state you're coming from probably can't get it done. And also just from the perspective of the seller and the listing agent, when you submit an offer, you theoretically want them to see a pre-approval from a bank that they've heard of before. This is quite important, especially in a competitive bidding environment. If all else is equal and your pre-approval is not from a household bank, they may be more inclined to potentially go with the other buyer. So just keep that in mind. So we hope you found this video to be helpful. I'm Nick at House It. Again, call or text me if you want to speak to me directly. Happy to chat about your purchase. And welcome to New York City, and we appreciate you watching our video.